Thanks for that very kind and generous introduction. And I can tell you that it's great being here at the GAP Summit, something that I've looked forward to because I've heard so much about how the GAP Summit is choreographed. And I thought that's a wonderful way of getting students from across the world to come and share a lot of thoughts and views from people who've been there and done that. So today it's indeed a great honor for me to speak about my entrepreneurial journey at a venue that's so close to the Cavendish Laboratory, a laboratory that has such an extraordinary history about it, especially with respect to my own business because, my heroes Watson, Crick and Rosalind Franklin, of course, were the ones who unraveled the double helix at the Cavendish lab. So it's a great honor for me. And let me start by saying that, I've entitled my talk An Accidental Entrepreneur because that's what I am. Like many scientific discoveries which have been accidents, so has my own story of entrepreneurship. Never in my wildest dreams had I imagined that I would run a business of my own one day. After graduating with a BSc in biology, after graduating in biology in my own hometown of Bangalore, I was at the crossroads of deciding what to do next. I mean, should I pursue a PhD in genetics? Should I basically go for medicine? Those were the kind of questions I was asking myself. And then something in me told me that no, I wanted to do something in applied science. And my late father kind of seeded an idea into me saying, hey, if you're really interested in applied science, why don't you pursue brewing science? I mean, I thought that was a really daft idea, but then it sort of slowly started sinking into me, and that's what I did. I actually went to Australia and pursued a program in brewing and malting science and became India's first qualified female brewmaster, and that was in 1975. So that's how I actually started out my life, thinking that I was going to pursue a brewing profession in my home country of India, where a number of breweries had started sprouting up. And coming back from Australia, I was armed with a lot of self-confidence and an air of competence, I would say. And so much so that I thought when I came back to my own country, I thought I would be hotly pursued by all the breweries in the country. But I was in for a rude shock. No brewery in India was ready to hire a woman brewer. I was considered a cultural and a professional misfit. I was told that I would not be acceptable to either management or to the labor or to the trade unions that operated in those breweries. And I was simply told that this was not a woman-friendly job, so I should give up this whole ambition of pursuing a brewing career. And I realized that this was no glass ceiling. This was a concrete wall that I had hit. So there was no question of trying to now pursue my profession, which I had trained for, which I was so excited to pursue. And so, as a fallback, I started consulting for a number of breweries in India, troubleshooting, helping them with some of their problems. But of course, none of them wanted to give me a permanent job. So I began sort of simultaneously looking for a job overseas, thinking that, okay, if I pursue a brewing career in the Western world, maybe there wouldn't be such a gender bias. And finally, I did land myself a job in Scotland in February 1978. And I was actually all set to proceed to take up this job when an accidental encounter with an Irish biotech entrepreneur actually changed my life. This biotech entrepreneur was someone called Leslie Auchincloss, who had founded an Irish biotech company making enzymes. And he tracked me down in India, and he came up with a very interesting proposal. He said he wanted to start a joint venture in India, and he was very keen to see if I could partner him in this joint venture to make enzymes. And one of his main sort of interests in doing that in India was to basically develop and manufacture a plant-based enzyme called papain. The Irish biotech company themselves were developing a range of microbial enzymes, and papain was something they needed to make their portfolio complete. And so he said to me, why don't you take up this opportunity and help me with this endeavor in India? And of course, my immediate response was an emphatic no. I reasoned saying that, I had no business background, I had no capital to invest in the joint venture, and most of all, I had just experienced a very hostile business environment when it came to professional women in India. In fact, I went so far as to say, look, forget about considering me as your joint venture partner, but I'll introduce you to a number of very successful businessmen in India who I'm sure would be more appropriate to pursue this joint venture. But Leslie Auchincloss was determined to make me change my mind, and he talked me into taking on this challenge. And he said, look, you had the spunk to become a brewer. Surely you have the spunk to become an entrepreneur. And that was the way he kind of helped me kind of take on this bold bet. And I literally started my company in 1978 on a note of spirited challenge and really a leap into the unknown. So you can see I started my entrepreneurial journey quite by accident. I also secretly thought that this would give me a great opportunity to vindicate myself and prove all those people who refused to give me a job wrong. So looking back, it does seem absurd that India's largest biotech company was founded because of a gender bias. No regrets though. So, let me talk to you about my journey. So let me start with the credibility challenges that I went through in really sort of building the business. When I set up Biocon in 1978, the environment in India was not just frugal but also very hostile. There was no question of having access to venture capital, because there was no concept of venture capital in India. All that we had those days was high interest debt financing. That's what we had access to. And business finance in the late 1970s demanded collateral, security, a demonstrated business track record, and a well understood business model. I had none of these. I was in fact a 25-year-old entrepreneur, a woman at that, with no business experience and no collateral to offer. To make matters worse, I was promoting a high-risk, unknown business model on a relatively unknown science, which was biotechnology. There was little or no appreciation for either enterprise or entrepreneurial talent, least of all for a woman peddling a nascent technology like biotech. So I was considered a high, unbankable financial risk. It took me several months before I could convince one banker to extend a credit line for working capital. I guess a number of life tech startups, especially in a country like India, still face the same access to capital challenge. When it comes to, things like Series B funding, you can see that I constantly get biotech startups and life tech startups come to me saying, we just can't seem to raise the next round of funding. Because I really feel that the risk appetite for backing cutting edge innovation is very low with most VCs that operate in our part of the world. I think the US is the only country that has got the VC risk appetite that you need to really, really foster this very innovative ecosystem. So that was my first big challenge. How do I access capital? And as I said to you, again, it was an accidental encounter with a banker who kind of got interested in what I was doing, and he gave me that first credit line, and that's what got me started. And then came the recruitment challenge. You know, I began operations under very Spartan circumstances. My office was in a rented garage where I set about building my enterprise. And you know, literally, you know, I could almost pride myself in saying I was one of the first startups or tech startups in India the way I started my business. And you heard yesterday, many of you, that you know, it is very important to count your pennies when you're starting up, and you've got to be very frugal, you've got to be very Spartan. And building a biotech startup in a third world country like India was very tough. You know, I was trying to start this great sophisticated tech-based company in a country where you had no assured good quality power supply to begin with, and that was really tough. Adding to this was of course my gender challenge. Whether it was hiring people or availing working capital, as a 25-year-old inexperienced woman entrepreneur, I was considered a huge risk. Potential recruits would turn me down because they felt a woman-run business could not provide them job security. So I actually started Biocon with 2 retired automobile mechanics as my first employees. They were the only ones who would join me. In fact, very often I would have an interview, and the people would come to me and say, well, we have an appointment with the managing director, and they would assume I'm the secretary. And you know, they'd come to me and I'd say, well, that's me. And I knew immediately they didn't want to take up this job. But eventually, you know, as I started the business, I managed to attract scientists and engineers from leading institutions like the Indian Institutes of Technology and even from the mighty Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They all shared my excitement and were willing to take a leap of faith in my endeavor, and they thus formed the crack team that built Biocon. In fact, one of my early colleagues, Sri Kumar, is in the audience. He actually took that bold bet and joined me many, many moons ago, and he himself is an entrepreneur today and is going to share his story, which started actually in Biocon. So it's very interesting to note that you know, this is what this, you know, this challenge, this journey is all about. And over time, once you get over those credibility challenges, great things happen, you know. And apart from the challenge of recruitment and access to capital, I also had another challenge, and that was to basically introduce this concept of enzyme technologies, biotechnologies. Biotech was a business that was unheard of, and enzyme technology was absolutely alien to Indian industry. And I therefore had a dual challenge of concept selling and at the same time investing in an R&D effort to develop commercial scale manufacturing of industrial enzymes that would redefine industrial processing. So I had to take that bet saying, no, I'm going to convince these people that enzyme technologies are important. And we hit our first milestone of developing a proprietary solid state fermentation technology for fungal enzymes within a few years. The challenge was now to scale it to commercial operations. So, you know, the R&D efforts paid off. You know, Sri Kumar was leading that particular effort, and we were excited when we actually got our first demonstrated prototype that worked, and we felt excited. We said, now this is the time to now go for it and scale it up. But again, I had a tremendous funding challenge because scaling a technology from pilot to commercial scale required a much larger capital. Banks were very reluctant to back this. A homegrown technology was perceived to be high risk. And no one wanted to basically back such a technology. They kept saying, look, every other entrepreneur is in-licensing technology from overseas. Why are you trying to basically create and take such a big risk with your own technology? Again, it was a chance meeting with the chairman of a leading financial institution that led to an unexpected venture funding. I was here looking for debt financing, and this meeting actually got me venture funding. And it is this that enabled me to basically translate our research efforts into commercial scale success. Like they say, timing is everything. And in this case, my ready to scale indigenously developed enzyme technology was just the kind of investment that the freshly created venture fund needed. And it was just great that I managed to meet the head of this, the bank, and get him excited about what I was doing. So again, that was something that really helped me to take off, to build credibility, and to basically get off to a much bigger start. So let me tell you what this technology was about. It was a technology that we referred to as solid state fermentation technology, which was really about cultivating fungi on a matrix of wheat bran and various specialized nutrients. This was actually ideally suited for a very primitive country like India, because it was low cost, low energy, and it could still manufacture a range of enzymes which in fact had very special properties. In fact, we attained global leadership for certain types of enzymes, pectinases, using this platform. The profits that we realized from this particular success was actually plowed back to develop genetically engineered enzymes in, of course, conventional deep tank fermentation. And within 2 decades, we had 2 technology platforms, one solid state and the other conventional submerged fermentation, churning out a range of specialty industrial enzymes that were being exported to US markets, to European markets, and competing with the likes of large companies like Novozymes, Genencor, and DSM. Now, competing with the best in global markets was certainly something that taught us a thing or two about reputational values and continual process improvement. We invested in automation and state-of-the-art infrastructure to manage customer expectations. Remember, we were a company based in India, and we had huge credibility challenges because of the fact that it was a sophisticated technology. Customers were concerned about quality, these sort of infrastructural conditions in India, and the ability to actually turn out consistent standardized products. And it was very important for me to stave off these perception hurdles of being an Indian company, and that is why we did not cut corners. We kept investing in building infrastructure that could be perceived as very up-end and state-of-the-art. Many years later, of course, once we got into this whole technology play, we also then invested in building state-of-the-art facilities for mammalian cell culture, because that was a very important technology platform that we also felt was important for us. And I will talk to you about that a little later. Now I want to really turn my whole presentation to a very important inflection point in my entrepreneurial journey. In 1989, we witnessed the takeover of our Irish partners by the globally renowned multinational Unilever. And this actually brought in a huge amount of transformation for our company. Overnight, we underwent this business transformation from being an amateurish enterprise, which was learning by trial and error, to being a part of a large multinational conglomerate that wanted huge compliance and conformance to standards and systems. You know, as a member of Unilever, we were expected to comply with Unilever's financial reporting systems, quality and manufacturing systems, and all these were basically benchmarked to global best practices. And in retrospect, it was this forced compliance that enabled us to be world class. And it brought in this very strong culture of professionalism into the organization. Thanks to Unilever, we also understood the value of intellectual property and proprietary technologies. Years later, when we divested our enzymes business in 2007 to one of our biggest global competitors, Novozymes, we unlocked significant value for our proprietary enzymes and enzyme technologies, realizing a 25x EBITDA multiple. So I think this was really something that we valued and cherished, saying that, you know, it was just as well that we focus so much on proprietary technologies that could actually unlock this kind of value. Now, in 1998, Unilever decided to exit the specialty ingredients business globally, and a part of that was our enzymes business. This was a turning point for us, because I decided to buy out Unilever's shareholding and become wholly independent. I did not want to again be sort of sold off to another multinational partner. So I just felt that this was our opportunity to really buy back our independence and then go it alone. So this was a very important decision that I took way back in 1998, but that was what was very transformational for the company. So this was independence poses an existential question to most of us. Was enzymes a sustainable business in the long term, we asked. Could we leverage our fermentation platforms to manufacture other products? Enzymes was a high volume, low value business. In 20 years, we had managed to build a $25 million business of certain specialty enzymes, for which we had a 25% global market share. So great market share to boast of, a very profitable business at that, but just $25 million. The question we asked is, could we ever be a billion-dollar company? This introspection led us to reinventing ourselves as a biopharmaceutical company. Biopharmaceuticals, very unlike enzymes, were a high value, low volume business opportunity. So what did we do? We started leveraging the technologies that we had built for enzymes. After all, biotech, you have to be agnostic to what you are doing. You can actually use it for a number of different business opportunities, and one of them was biopharmaceuticals. So what did we do? We looked at all the technologies that we had developed for enzymes, and we said, okay, we've got fungal enzymes that we've developed on solid state fermentation. What can we do with this enzyme platform? And we realized that we could actually leverage this for developing statins, cholesterol reducing drugs. And we actually became the first company globally to develop lovastatin using solid state fermentation, and US FDA approved our facility as well. The second technology we looked at was our recombinant DNA yeast technology that we were using for developing certain specialty enzymes. And that was the technology we leveraged to actually develop insulin. Now, that was actually a very important decision-making point for us. India was the diabetes capital of the world, and yet we were importing all our insulins. In fact, it was described as the disease of halves. Only half of them were actually diagnosed, and of those diagnosed, only half of them could access insulin, and those who could actually access insulin were only half compliant because of affordability. So this is what actually induced me to looking at insulin as an important differentiator for Biocon in terms of a biopharmaceutical company. And I looked at this both as addressing a huge need for a country like India, but I also saw this as an import substitution opportunity, and of course an opportunity to export and make a difference to patients outside India as well. Our research efforts of course resulted in bringing a made in India insulin to the Indian market in 2004, and this was followed by another insulin product, an insulin analog called Glargine in 2008. Only last month we received regulatory approval from the European authority for our insulin Glargine, which is considered to be a biosimilar product. Today we have assumed the status of being the world's third largest producer of insulins in volume terms, with state-of-the-art facilities in India and in Malaysia. And then we focused on another very important class of life-saving drugs for cancer and autoimmune diseases. Again, it was about an unmet need in a country like India. Very few people and patients could afford access or even have access to life-saving biologics, which were beginning to get used in cancer and autoimmune diseases. Again, I felt this was an important opportunity for us to make a big difference. But this was a technology that was hard to come by, and therefore a recce visit to Cuba in 2001 led to the in-licensing of two novel monoclonal antibodies, along with the technology transfer that enabled us to develop expertise in mammalian cell culture. We commercialized our first monoclonal antibody, which was an antibody targeting EGFR for head and neck cancer in 2006. Now again, head and neck cancer is the type of cancer that is most prevalent in a country like India. 35% of cancers in India are head and neck cancers, and I thought that was an important unmet need to address. In 2012, we actually developed another very interesting antibody, an anti-CD6 antibody for psoriasis. And this antibody actually is a very important antibody that is now being developed in the US for a number of rare diseases and autoimmune diseases. So our understanding of developing biologics in this particular way, where we actually started with novel biologics, actually brought in huge learning into the system. We had developed a very deep understanding of biologics, of antibodies, of mechanism of action of antibodies and what have you. And this led to another business strategy, which was to develop biosimilar antibodies, given the kind of expertise and knowledge we had developed for these kind of products. And we embarked on a very important partnership with a company called Mylan to develop our first portfolio of biosimilar antibodies, and of course we had the distinction of being the first company globally to receive US FDA approval for our biosimilar trastuzumab, or Herceptin as most people know it, late last year. Most recently we have also announced a partnership with Sandoz for the next wave of biosimilar antibodies. So the biopharma strategy of course has played out very well, where we really leveraged the technologies and built our business that way. And I think what was very important was the Unilever learning that was about competitive advantage that emanates from economies of scale. I think one of the interesting aspects of transforming and transiting from enzymes to biopharmaceuticals was the fact that, if you remember, I told you that enzymes was high volume, low value, and biopharmaceuticals were the other way around. Fortunately, the high volume commercial scale that we had actually built for enzymes suddenly made us sort of global scale manufacturers of biopharmaceuticals, because that scale actually allowed us to be the low volume, high value but global scale manufacturers of products like insulin and biopharmaceuticals. Now, the transition to biopharmaceuticals also brought in a steep learning curve in terms of both quality and regulatory know-how. Regulations for enzyme manufacturing were relatively simple and straightforward. The lab to market journey was fairly short, with simple lab experiments followed by plant trials to establish proof of concept, and with minimal regulations to really enter the market. However, biopharmaceuticals was not only radically different, but introduced long and lengthy processes for lab to market. And it involved a number of steep stage gates that we had never seen before. As explained earlier, we started incorporating global best practices when Unilever came into the picture. And it was this that enabled us to address the high bar set by the regulations that govern biopharmaceuticals. As an entrepreneur, I had ensured that we projected the Made in India label for enzymes to stand for quality and reliability. And it was the same approach to quality and regulatory culture that we actually imposed on our biopharmaceutical business. So this is my journey in terms of how we've sort of built up the business from enzymes to biopharmaceuticals. But now let me turn to how you sort of go about the marketplace. It is always difficult to swim against the tide, and Biocon has had its fair share of challenges of being a first mover in the biopharma space. After a hugely successful IPO in 2004, which saw us as a $1 billion market cap company on day one of listing, we realized that this euphoria was short-lived. Investors and analysts had failed to understand the long gestation, high risk and high investment nature of our business. Perhaps we had done a poor job of managing their expectations. Most investors expected biotechnology to yield the kind of quick returns that it had seen in the information technology sector with software services companies. These were easy to understand business models with short and predictable timelines. IT companies in India were low risk, predictive in their business models, and these were service-led businesses, not product-led businesses. Biotech, on the other hand, was high in capital investment with long gestational timelines and unpredictable outcomes that introduced high levels of unpredictability and related risk. And more importantly, Biocon's business was about products, not services. So Biocon actually had delivered handsome returns to its private equity investors when it went for the IPO. We were the first biotech company in India to list on the Indian stock exchanges. The IPO was oversubscribed 33 times. And as I told you, on the first day of listing, we had a $1 billion market cap. Subsequently, however, for over a decade, investors and analysts felt very disappointed because we were not generating the fancy PE multiples they were hoping for. I simply feel they failed to understand the value of innovation. So, a decade later, after underperforming the broader markets in the past decade, Biocon is now outperforming its peers. Today, we are one of the sought-after stocks in the Indian pharmaceutical space because we are a highly differentiated stock. and the only one from India to be among the front runners addressing a large and lucrative biosimilars opportunity that is rapidly emerging on the global stage. In the past year alone, the Biocon stock has soared more than 50% to attain a market capitalization of just over $5 billion. However, this just hasn't happened on its own. This has happened through painstaking education and endurance. That's what we've done over the last few years. We focused on a well-calibrated campaign to educate our investors on the value creation journey that we have embarked upon. We have gone on several roadshows to talk about the research and regulatory complexity involved in developing biosimilars, the enormous capital investment required to take such drugs to the market, and the risks associated with adoption and reimbursement of biosimilar drugs, all of which we explained are deterrents to intense competition. On December 1st, 2017, we delivered on our promise by becoming, as I mentioned earlier, the first in the world to receive a US FDA approval for a biosimilar trastuzumab for treating aggressive forms of breast and gastric cancers. We followed this with another milestone when the European Commission recently approved our insulin glargine, which in fact had already been approved by the Japanese authorities a few years earlier. So finally, we had earned the credibility from our investors. Our pipeline of biosimilars was no longer a high risk with low probability of success, but a high value market opportunity. That is what we explained to our investors, because all along we were being absolutely bashed because of the fact that they perceived this to be high risk, low return. And for the first time, our investors started seeing this as a high value market opportunity with very little competition. And they also figured out that for people to catch up in terms of what we were doing was going to take them at least 5 years. So we had a great first mover advantage. So I'm going to basically now share with you my views on what it takes to be an entrepreneur. Okay? I think entrepreneurship is perhaps one of the most economically empowering pursuits. I think you've heard this several times from several speakers, and I really believe that this is so. Every entrepreneur embarks on a journey that is fraught with risk, doubt, skepticism, and inherent failure. I don't think there is a single entrepreneur who can basically say that they knew exactly what they were doing, they had zero risks to address, and everything worked like a dream. I think that's absolutely kidding yourself if you think that that's what you're embarking on. The notion of taking an idea to the market is daunting, but very exciting. It is extremely aspirational, but yet very, very challenging. I found this in my journey all the way. But every entrepreneurial journey is about overcoming these fears and challenges and converting self-doubt to self-belief. I think, as I mentioned, every time you fail, you pick yourself up because you learn from that failure and you move on. And that is a very, very powerful emotion that gives you a lot of self-belief. You know, when you overcome that challenge, you get a lot of self-belief, self-confidence, and that's what helps you to move on to the next level. Well, entrepreneurship is a very arduous path that starts with overcoming credibility challenges. You know, I mentioned a lot of what I went through, but not everyone goes through those challenges, but nevertheless, I think every entrepreneur, every startup goes through the credibility challenges that investors pose. How good is your idea? Will it work? Is it worth funding? I'm sure all of you who have a great idea want to know, is it worth basically pursuing? I know many people yesterday asked me, like, I've got this idea, I've got that idea, what do you think I should do? Well, it's for you to figure out. I mean, that's one thing I would say to entrepreneurs. Certainly you can bounce ideas off people, but at the end of the day, unless you believe in that idea, you can't drive that idea. So that's the first important, golden rule of entrepreneurship is you've got to believe in that idea to basically drive it forward. Once you raise the startup capital, you have crossed the first entrepreneurial milestone. That's the first credibility challenge that you overcome, because somebody has bought into your idea, and that's extremely important. Then comes the proof of concept and the ability to demonstrate the potential of commercial success, which leads to the next level of capital raising or Series B funding. And this again is a very important milestone that firmly places you on a path ahead that is about validating one's entrepreneurial capabilities in value creation and building scale. To me, those are the two key benchmarks that I have learned in ensuring business sustainability and business impact. Value creation and building scale. Because without those two, you really cannot create the true impact that you really want to have. As an entrepreneur, I truly believe that entrepreneurship is about staying the course and believing in your business model. You're going to have many skeptics, many critics, but I think you have to stay your course if you believe in what you're doing. It is an endurance test. It's about conviction and strength of courage to withstand all these obstacles and skepticism if you want to cross the finishing line. Finally, entrepreneurial success is all about managing risks and failures. Nothing is predictable or guaranteed in a fast-changing world that brings new and disruptive ideas every day. In fact, yesterday I think you all heard that leadership is about empowering people to take risks, but then the leader has to take the blame if those risks go wrong. So I think that's a very important message that I would like to give all of you as aspiring entrepreneurs. Please follow that tenet. Empower others to take risk, but take the blame yourself. I've believed in that very strongly myself. Today's entrepreneur, therefore, has to prove relevance through a greater focus on understanding the emerging and existing competitive landscape. It's not easy for entrepreneurs today because every day there's a new idea that suddenly seems to overtake your original idea. Are you going to change your idea? Are you going to basically do something different? I know it's very tough, but I think you can still stay with that idea as long as you tweak that idea in terms of what you're seeing out there in the marketplace. Resourcefulness and a pioneering spirit have always proven to be the hallmarks of success. And I think underlying all of this, my view on and my message to all aspiring entrepreneurs is, one thing is you've got to be different and daring. Pursue business differentiation, no matter what it is, whether it's your business model, whether it's your product, whether it's your marketing strategy, whatever it is. If you have that strategy of differentiation, I think you will stand apart. And you've got to be bold and above all, pursue your goals and aspirations with purposeful resolve. When I started my entrepreneurial journey in biopharmaceuticals, I decided I've got to make big impact on global healthcare. And I was driven by a mission which was about the fact that blockbuster drugs are not about $1 billion. It's about serving 1 billion patients. That's what my entrepreneurial mission is all about today. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an inspiring talk. I am Raja. a student from Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. I want to ask about Indian government recent flagship program, Startup India, Stand Up India. They have added a special clause for bio entrepreneurship. So, what are your opinions on that? How is it exactly helping new biotech startups and youngsters to pursue entrepreneurship in biotechnology?
I think every government today wants to basically foster entrepreneurships and startups. Anywhere you go in the world, there is this huge, strategy of, spawning startups, and India is no exception. And I think India is a bit late to this particular strategy, but I think it's very important. I think governments can provide seed money, and I think seed money will get you up to probably one stage below proof of concept. You can just about get to a prototype or maybe early proof of concept. I think what you need to really focus on is to use that government money to then make sure that you get your next round of funding. And the next round of funding is not going to come from the government. It is going to come from venture capital or from other kinds of funding. So I think you need to focus on making sure that the government money is used as a risk capital seed fund to basically get you to the next level. I think it's very important that all governments do it, because nobody else is going to invest in risk capital like what governments do. I mean, I think the US has been a great example of how they've fostered this whole startup ecosystem through various kinds of seed funding and small business initiatives and things like that. So I think it's very good what the Indian government is doing.
Thank you. It was a really inspirational and life-changing talk. Especially because I also come from a developing country. You provided the answer that I was looking 2 days ago about what we need to do things different. So that's great. But it's incredible the technology that you develop. But my question is going to your leadership. You mentioned that you face it not a glass ceiling, but a concrete wall. First as an Indian woman, but first of all as a woman. Yesterday we talked about innovation and diversity and inclusion in innovation. So what could you provide us to the ones that we do not fit in the predefined models to get for our entrepreneurial dreams? That is my question. What we could do to breaking down those concrete walls.
Okay. Where do you come from?
Mexico. I'm an Buenos Aires,
Ah,
MH
okay.
student, genomic biotechnology from Mexico.
Okay, great.
So this is Mexico.
Yeah. So I think every entrepreneur goes through these challenges, like you just asked me, and I think yes, there are some which are concrete walls, others which are make-believe walls, and I find that in entrepreneurship you can go around the wall. So I just believe that nothing should stop you. If you believe in something, then I think you need to just sort of go with your idea. And that's what I've done all my life. Basically, as I told you, I hit that concrete wall because I couldn't get a job in India. But I managed to get a job overseas. Of course, my life changed, which is a different thing. But I think everyone finds a way of finding a way around something that appears to be a huge barrier. And I think that's what life is about in any case. Life is about overcoming barriers and obstacles. And I think once you get over that, you actually become far more confident to face the next set of challenges. So I wish you all the best.
Hello, I'm Nellie. I'm an undergraduate student here at the University of Cambridge. I'd like to thank you again for this inspiring talk. You talked a lot about overcoming barriers, believing in your ideas. I would just like to ask you for your opinion on mentorship, the importance of people who go along with you during this journey, and maybe just give examples of people who influenced you and helped you to achieve what you achieved. Thank you.
Good question. I think I've been inspired by people both within the organization and outside as well. I think, when you're building a company like what I've had the opportunity to do, you work with a very close team of people who constantly kind of support and inspire each other. So, you're on a journey of innovation, And that journey of innovation has to have a very strong sense of shared values. And I think when you have your own team all very energized and focused on delivering on that particular that objective, I think that itself is a very inspirational part of your journey. The other thing is, of course, so all my colleagues actually inspire me a lot, and I know they are the sort of reason that gets me to move on and on. But I think I also am inspired by two other external factors. One is the difference that we are making on patients' lives. I think that is a very important part of what inspires me. You know, when patients walk up to me and say, you know, I can't tell you how you've transformed my life or how you've saved my life. I think those are very powerful words to hear. And then of course I've had people along the way who I consider mentors, you know, who sort of are people I bounce ideas off, who I basically turn to when I'm trying to work out something. I think people have those kind of mentors. Some of them are the ones who actually helped me at the most important part of my entrepreneurial journey. Some of them are still there. And I very often now, it's not about mentorship so much, but it's about, you know, sharing thoughts and views and having discussions and debates with such people who were originally my mentors. Today I think it's really my team at work and the patients who actually benefit from the work we are doing that really sort of inspires me to move on.
Hi, my name is Winnie. I'm from China. Your experience actually touched my heart because it resembles a lot of things I've been through in China and in US while being an entrepreneur. So I do have a question for you that's a little bit personal. What's the most regrettable moment in your personal life and in your business that you wish it had not happened? And what do you think you can do to prevent that happening again in the future? Thank you.
So, like I said, in my personal life, I think I really have no regrets that I was rejected a number of times, okay? And I don't think I would like to change that again, because that rejection is what made me stronger and stronger each part of my way. As an entrepreneur, I think I have still failed to get the credibility that I want for Indian innovation. You know, we have come up with two great drugs in the Indian market, but I haven't convinced the doctors in India to actually embrace those drugs as great drugs. I finally had to basically license one of those drugs to the US to earn that credibility. Why is it that all of us have to basically do something in the US to earn credibility is the question I ask. Why can't we do it in our own countries? Why can't our own countries and why can't our own societies and our own governments and our own people celebrate the innovation that's coming out of their own countries? That really befuddles me. And I'm trying to sort of, you know, build that credibility for a country like India, which suffers so much from a number of perception hurdles. And no matter what the kind of innovation that comes out of India, and I know, for instance, I've spoken to a large number of startups in India. India is a very exciting time right now because there are so many startups in India which are doing some really, really clever things. And you know, I mentor a lot of these startups and I see some mind-boggling stuff happening in India. And yet I know that 80% of those startups will never get the next round of funding because, as I told you, I think venture funds in India want to back low-risk business opportunities. And there's plenty of low-risk business opportunities in the IT space where the regulatory requirements are so low. Unlike life tech and biotech, where you know that you have to go through a gestational regulatory timeline which is very, very long and unpredictable. So I just, and many of these people tell me that, look, we can't do anything in India, so we've just got to register companies in the US so that we can then avail of venture capital in the US to take us to the next level, even though all the work that is being done is back home in India. That to me is very sad. And I'm sure this is happening in many parts of the world. So I, in my lifetime, want to make sure that we bring one drug from our laboratories to a global market of global recognition. That would be my life's dream fulfilled. You know, we are trying to develop the world's first oral insulin in a tablet. we're trying to develop a very interesting fusion antibody that we've developed. Great data right now, but we have to see how it translates in the clinic. As I told you, we had this great drug that we had developed for psoriasis in India. I couldn't basically get credibility or acceptance of that drug in a bigger way. So I've now licensed it to a US biotech company who's now going to do all the great development and get it approved as a drug for a certain rare disease. And then I know that that drug would have done what it's supposed to do to enter global markets. But I couldn't do it. And that's what is my failing.
Thank you for an amazing talk. I hate to belabor the point with anecdotal questions when you have so many technical strengths. But what really fascinates me and what I understand a lot relates is we have 6 female speakers and panelists. 3 were from India and the same 3 were entrepreneurs. So what I'm asking about, I don't presume to know much about the subcontinent or its economy or its traditions, but I understand they're very deep and very varied. So what I would like to know is, are there any approaches to gender equity that you've seen that are unique to India that have either failed or succeeded, and why you believe that is the case in each case?
So I think, in the case of biotech, I know that my own sort of entrepreneurial journey has inspired many other women to pursue biotech as an entrepreneurial career. But I also know that when it comes to accessing capital, some have been very successful and some haven't. And there's no sort of a generalization of anything that I can think of. All I can say is we are seeing more women coming into the mainstream. At least in the life tech space, it's very interesting to know, but in India, we had 1,200 startups being created over the last 5 years. And 30% of them had either women founders or co-founders. So that to me was very, very encouraging. But in terms of, the path ahead, I think every entrepreneur is struggling with the next round of funding. And I know that women find it more difficult to avail that next round of funding than their male counterparts. So I'm just hoping that this inequity that exists right now does kind of obliterate with more success stories coming from women-led businesses.
Thank you so much for giving us this incredible story. I wanted to touch on the last point. Something we see in California is that a lot of the VCs that do really well are ones that have revisited the pool after becoming entrepreneurs. Because the traditional VCs, the ones who sort of come from only banking, they actually miss out completely on the whole journey and they have no understanding of the risks that it takes. So in addressing the funding gap, do you see perhaps yourself or your colleagues who have now established such heights of success coming back and being able to be a voice in that new funding landscape, providing a sort of different type of investment than perhaps the banks and traditional VCs?
No, you're absolutely right. I think you hit a very, very important point where we see that the funding in risk is much better when you have people who come from the industry itself. And I think there are a large number of funds today who are beginning to basically induct people with that kind of skill base. And I think that's going to make a big difference because like you said, they need to understand what that journey is about.
I'm afraid
Yeah.
to stop here.
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much for a great talk and a great discussion. Thank you.